Welcome to SportsBeat KC, Kansas City Star Sports podcast presented by First Federal Bank. It's Friday, April 22nd. I'm Blair Kirchhoff. The NFL Draft is less than a week away, and today we heard from Chiefs General Manager Brett Veach. That means you'll hear from him as well. We'll bring you his entire press conference on today's show. Veach is good at dropping hints about what direction the Chiefs might go in the draft. First, note that the Chiefs own 12 picks, including 2 in each of the first 4 rounds. It's a major advantage. But just from listening to Veach, don't expect the Chiefs to make a blockbuster move by trading up in the first round. You'll also hear his thoughts on the Tyreek Hill trade and why the team and Tyrann Mathieu could not reach a deal. Okay, let's get started with Brett Veach.
All right, well, this is fun. Haven't done this in a while. Apologize for running a little late. When you have 12 picks, these meetings tend to take a little bit longer. Before I open it up for questions, just want to thank my staff for all the hard work they've done in getting ready for this draft. It's funny because the last 2 years it was really just Zoom meetings and tape, and now all of a sudden you have the combine and you have the workouts there, and then the pro days, and then the in-house visits, and the coaches going out there working players. So we've been going at it 100 miles an hour, but certainly excited about next week and the opportunity to add a lot of talent to the kingdom. Going to have a lot of fun with these picks, and like I said, just look forward to the process and getting next week started. So with that, I'll open up for questions.
So a couple of years ago it was Frank Clark, and last year it was Orlando Brown. Who's it going to be?
Debo Samuel. Yeah. No, we look. We've.
You were ready.
Yeah, I was. No, we're excited about the talent we have on the roster. We're also excited about the prospects in this draft class, and I think we've shown every indication of where we're going with this thing, and we're going to build through the draft, and having 12 picks and having flexibility year in and year out is something that we're certainly putting a lot of stock in. And like I said, we're excited to add talent on both sides of the football and work through the draft and get young and get deep.
Hey, Brett. Go ahead. I'm sorry. You sounded earlier that the intent of the organization was to sign Tyrann Mathieu, and it looked like he wanted to stay. Can you kind of go through what happened there, why that never came about?
Yeah, I mean, you know how these things work, Adam, especially when you transition to the season into the off season. We certainly had broad concept discussions with Tyrann prior to last preseason. And, when you have those kind of broad concept discussions, to the kids' credit and to his defense, I mean, those are usually geared toward team-friendly deals and what would make sense for us. And certainly we had a lot of hurdles with the contracts and the players on our team. So when we approached him, our expectations was that this was a long shot for us, but, let's see if we can get something done. But totally understand his position and where he was. And then you go into the season and, the player and the organization knows that once it gets into that next phase of evaluation and then the process of having guys under contract and then holding a franchise tag with Orlando Brown, it becomes tricky, and you have to be able to pivot and shift quickly, and we did that, but certainly can't say enough about Tyrann and how we feel about him.
Are you surprised he hasn't signed anywhere yet?
No, because I think he's a guy that knows what he wants, and he's going to be selective. I'm sure he has some choices out there, but he's certainly is an accomplished player, and he's done a lot of things in this league. So I don't think that he's in a rush to make a decision. I think he has choices, and I think I'm not surprised just because when you've done the things that he's done and you won Super Bowls and been to Pro Bowls, I don't think there's a need to rush and take all the information in and spend time with your family and let the decision come to you as opposed to forcing a decision.
He did say that had you all made the same offer that you made to Reed, if it was to take it or leave it, he would have taken it. If as it gets closer to the season and you all look like you might need some help, would there be interest in possibly bringing them back?
I think anything's on the table, and I think that goes for how we operate at all levels. I mean, he's a player that we know and we love, and if there's a situation that makes sense for him, it's all about him now. Certainly we wouldn't close the door to that because of the way we feel about him.
Right. In any way you want to evaluate a draft class, you can always do it by saying how many first-round grades you have. I think last year you said there were 17. When you look at this year's group, how has that evaluation process gone, and how does it compare or similar to last year?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities to last draft, I think we have right around 16, 18 names on our front board as first round picks, and picking there at 29 and 30, the odds of maybe one of those guys falling isn't great, but at the same time, we're probably not factoring quarterbacks that most teams do. I'm sure there's quarterbacks worthy of a first-round grade, which is obviously not going in that direction. But I think similar to last year, I think when you look at value in this draft, 30 to 60 is really good. We were able to get Nick Bolton and Creed Humphrey last year. I think there'll be a lot of value similar to that. I think a lot of really good players in that second, third round.
Brett, putting out there that you were negotiating with Tyreek, and it was kind of a long process, eventually ended up trading. How much did the talking and the delay there maybe impact the original offseason plan, if at all?
Well, I think it did to an extent. I think certainly, the market kind of guides, the delays or the efficiency of how things go. So I think once the receiver deals start coming in, you knew it'd be a little tricky. When we looked at this offseason, I think on our agenda was, to add talent to the defensive side, whether it be defensive line or whether it be in the secondary, and take care of Tyreek. And it became obvious as the free agency started that it was going to be tough to do both. So, you're faced with the decision: do you dip into the older veteran pass rush market? If you do that, then how are you going to pay Tyreek? And then how does Tyreek feel about that? If you do the Tyreek thing, then you're limited in regards to your resources being able to be spent on defense plus future. With that type of deal, it would be impacted to a great deal. So when we took a step back and we figured, well, how are we going to get better on both sides? And that's why we decided it was best for us and really best for Tyreek getting that contract. So it was kind of a win-win in that situation. Again, it's hard to go out there and sign a veteran pass rusher, good players, but at that level, you probably couldn't do anything with Tyreek, and then how would he handle that? And we wouldn't do that. And at the same time, if you do that with Tyreek, again, you're limited in what you can do. So it was kind of a best-case scenario for us and for him.
I wanted to go back to something you said earlier. You talked about having 12 picks and being excited to use all of them or most of them. Do you anticipate when draft day comes around you're going to have 29 and you're going to still have 30? Or are you looking to move up maybe if the price is right and the player is right?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to just the unknowns and how the dominoes fall. We see it every year. I think, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, we had a weird dynamic where the board kind of fell off. It usually never falls off like you have it. So most teams deviate in some degree in how they have their board and how you have your board. But I don't know if it was last year or the year before. It was like every guy we had in the first round went like that. And, if it happens like that, then it's hard to envision, a trade up. But typically what happens, the board do deviate and they are different. And then when you find value of, we talk about 16, 18 guys being valued in the first round, then all of a sudden, you get the picks 19, 20, 21. There's still some of those guys on the board. I think you make a decision and see if you can maybe find a trade partner. If those 16 guys are off the board by the time you get to 19, 20, 21, then, I think it kind of drives the narrative to just stay put and just collect the assets. I don't probably foresee a huge jump up, just throwing a haymaker and trying to get in the top 10. Unless something unforeseen happens, I would say that, we'll be flexible and we'll let the board talk to us, and if there's value, we will, and if not, we'll just stay put.
Brett, that conversation you mentioned about Tyreek, was that a thought process you guys had talked about before the asking price might have been elevated?
I think, in this day and age with players and with, especially given our cap and the amount of talent we have on our team, it's always something that we have in our back of my mind, like what if, right? So I think before we go in to any negotiation, I think there's always, and I think we do a great job of just going over the what ifs. I mean, we've gone over just for the draft in general, what if, there's so many. So when you talk about free agency and contracts of that magnitude, in the back of your mind, you always have to play that out.
Brett, you had mentioned today you guys have made a concerted effort to, obviously it's cap related, but a concerted effort to get younger. And if so, how do you integrate the kind of balance of the immediate future and the long-term horizon here? I mean, I know it's a long-winded question, but yeah. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, it's a balancing act for sure, and I think that certainly every organization is driven to acquire depth and acquire youth. I think there are factors that come into play when you talk about veteran players and what they're able to add in regards to leadership and off the field intangibles that sometimes you can't put a price on. And you also factor in the injury history of players, and there are outliers. And knock on wood, like Travis Kelce is just a rare example of that, where he's just the best at what he does, and he continues to do it year after year. So there's always outliers to the equation, but I think it's just a balancing act in general.
Do you feel like we can say you're trying to extend the window?
Yeah.
And does that come at a cost to the sort of the foreground?
Well, I think, and I've said this before, I think when you have Pat Mahomes, I think we're wired to go after it every year. And even though you may make moves and may trade really good players, it doesn't mean that there'll be a counterpunch and that we'll try to be aggressive in another way. I think you just have to be smart and flexible with what you do. And I think what's needed to do that is draft resources and cap space. And so just because you trade away a great player doesn't mean we're in a rebuilding mode by any means. It means that we're just going to find a new set of resources and try to become aggressive.
What's it like when you get to that moment where you decide we're not going to re-sign Tyrann Mathieu, we're going to trade Tyreek Hill? I mean, you know there's going to be a blowback publicly a little bit when you make those moves. Well, what's that like when you get to that point? Is that any harder than anything else you do in that regard?
Yeah,
if that makes any sense?
It does. And that's a good question, but I think I see where the question's coming from, but I think it's more of a slower evolution where it's, here are the talks and they're going in this direction one day, and then they slowly start to creep in another, and then by the time you actually get to it, it's not one of those, as fans or media would see it, it would get dropped on a day, be like, whoa, that's a lot. But that was more of weeks of the evolution kind of shifting from an extension to maybe a trade to, and this is going to happen. So it's a little bit more played out for us. So when it does drop, it's already been flushed through our system for weeks, or if not more.
Okay, does it take you some time to get used to it in your own head? We're not going to have Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I think you just turn the radio off and that's what you do. And so my first year, you'd be like looking. Now it's like you learn quickly that whether you do something good or bad, it's it is what it is. And our job is to just put the blinders on and go to work and work hard and do the work and communicate with our staff and just do whatever we feel is best and just stick to the plan.
I don't just necessarily mean from the public, from the blowback standpoint, but you're altering the franchise for better or for worse with a single move. I mean, is that tough to come to grips with when you come down to, do we do this or not do this?
Yeah, I think, just in general in this league, I joke with the guys all the time. I always thought, like, if you become a GM and won a Super Bowl, it's like icing on the cake and, stress-free life. And it's the complete opposite. Every year you feel like it's not good enough. So I think just in general, working in this profession and being in this league, everyone literally forgets what you did the year before. And it's every year it's got to be something brand new and something different. And it motivates us. And we're certainly fortunate that we have guys that are wired to come in and compete every day. And talking to Pat every day and seeing the way he's working with those guys out there is certainly another motivating factor. But the pressures and the expectations are there, whether you won a Super Bowl the year before or whether you stink. There's still pressure to win, so I think we feel it all the time.
Buying your first home is a huge milestone, but the journey there can be confusing. First Federal Bank of Kansas City is here to make it simple. After nearly a century of serving the KC community, our loan advisors have experience in every type of housing market. With a short phone call, we can give you a free rate quote and talk through loan options. No pressure, no obligation. The road to home ownership can be simple with First Federal Bank. Get started with a free quote at ffbkc.com/homes. First Federal Bank of Kansas City, because banking is personal. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening.
Two questions for you. In the role of the GM, with the ascension of these players getting more guaranteed money up front and more guaranteed of their contract being guaranteed, how difficult is it, if any, is it making your job when it comes to, if you decide to do a trade, just for example, Debo Samuels, knowing the type of money he would want, versus whether or not you keep draft picks or whatever that will fall?
Well, yeah, and I just think it goes back to the landscape of your cash and cap situation in the short and long term, and I think that there will be times, and certainly this was a time where we decided to alter the course of action and to rely on draft picks, but I think it'll come full circle again where we're probably being aggressive, but I think we're always going to operate with the mindset of having flexibility, and I think those type of questions are more of a case-by-case situation and where the team is and what we feel is available to us in a particular year. I mean, some years you may feel like you can get something similar with a lesser trade or in the draft, and some years you feel like what's out there in free agency is just, you can't replicate something like that, so you have to be a little bit more bold and more aggressive, and the scheme and your depth, everything comes into play. So it's a case-by-case example, and I just think you have to be flexible year in and year out.
You were at the NFL owners meeting, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the mandate that came out of that was for NFL teams to hire offensive assistants. Where are you all at with that process and hiring a minority for the offensive coaching staff, and in your pool of candidates, are any of them coming from HBCUs?
Yeah, that would be something more that Coach would handle, but I know that one thing is where that falls on Coach's list of priority is right at the top, and obviously, the guys that we have on our staff are excellent, and certainly everyone knows how we feel about EB, and I think, Greg Lewis is another superstar in the making. I think he's an outstanding coach, and then Coach Merritt on the secondary has just been awesome to work with, but I know Coach handles that in regards to the interview process and the streamlines of resumes that come through him, but needless to say, that's at the top of his priority list.
Hey.
Brett, how much of your evaluation with you and your staff has changed in terms of looking at the cornerback class right now along with the defensive ends? And in that evaluation, do you feel like talking with Steve and the rest of the coaching staff that there might be a little bit more of an emphasis on one part of that defensive mindset heading into this draft?
No, I think that they're both up there, and it just comes down to our selection and where we value the guy. I think that they're both there neck and neck in regards to what we feel need-wise. So we've had great dialogue. In fact, running late for this meeting, we were in there with the defensive staff, and usually the Friday before the draft, we go through everything. So we actually just wrapped that up, and we did have some actually those questions of comparing those positions and where we'd be, but I think that there's a need to get better at all levels, and I think that there's certainly a high priority on both the end and corner, and I think we'll, hopefully with these picks, be in a position to add both of those positions.
On Orlando Brown, you guys put the tag on him.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding, he still doesn't have an agent. He's doing this himself right now. You obviously have to be prepared for him to sign that and play on that, but are you actively trying to get a long-term deal with him, and how complicated is that if he is or isn't going to hire an agent?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. So we did have dialogue with him, and then during the course of that dialogue, he's taken a step back, and he's got kind of redoing the agent process, and where we are right now, and in addition to the Tyreek Hill trade, with our cap and having flexibility now, it allows us to take a step back, get through this draft. We certainly anticipate that once the draft's over, I'm sure there'll be a point that there's a finality to him going out there and finding an agent, and then we'll have a ton of time to talk. And you guys know how the Chris Jones deal went, where it was it was right there toward the end. That's typically how a lot of these things go, where there's no rush on either side. On one end, the player likes to take their time and to really assess the current and future markets. On the flip side, the team is going through a draft process, and they have a ton on their plate, and they're trying to get through meetings and get through the board. And then usually after, everyone just takes a deep breath, and the draft ends, and there's that chunk of time in between the final mandatory OTAs. There's a lot of dialogue.
You feel like he's going to hire an agent, or is he going to represent himself? You have a feel yet?
I don't, and I'd hate to misspeak because it's important for him to. I mean, that's a big decision, and I don't want to certainly influence that either way. I think he's a really smart guy. He'll make a great decision, and whoever he decides to hire, or if he wants to represent himself, I mean, we'll be more than happy to sit down and talk long-term extension.
Generally speaking, in this class, I know you guys are deep into this. I was just wondering, wide net. Could you just talk about the wide receiver class and then the edge class and how you feel that it might dictate what you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, the edge class is deep. I think there's a lot of talented players there, and there's some numbers. Obviously, 1 through 2. So I think the numbers play into your equation. The receiver class it's unique this year because you have some different types of skill sets. And you guys know the top guys, you have a vertical guy, you have a bigger guy, you have a shifty guy, and you throw in some injuries and some long-term, analysis of where they'll be. It kind of throws a little bit of a wild card into, their final grade and where you take them. But like every year, you're always going to have with those skill positions, you're going to have, the top guys that everyone will kind of nitpick and what's best for you in there. But those guys are all talented at the top. Then there's another pocket of guys in the second round. And then like every year, those later rounds, there are a ton of, beauties in the eye of the beholder type deal. And the vision, the scheme, the fit all comes into play. And we spent obviously a ton of time with that. The running back class this year, it's really crazy because when you factor in that COVID year last year and some of the guys that stayed in school, I've never seen such a large group of, 5th, 6th, 7th round running backs. And it's like the names go from the top of the ceiling down to the bottom. So there'll certainly be I told the guys, my prediction is there'll be a 1,000-yard rusher that is an undrafted free agent or 7th round pick just by the sheer volume of numbers. But with those skill positions, there's always pockets and groups and ways, and just takes a lot of work to go through with the coaching staff. But we're able to do that, and I would say about 95% of our board is done now. We're just cleaning up some of the late round stuff. So I think we have a good plan, and we're excited for next week.
I have 2 questions. One, how much should media and fans believe when they hear coaches and GMs? I'm not talking about the guys here, but just league-wide. How much should we believe? And then secondly, after Tyreek Hill was taken, I think Coach and some people talked about how, boy, there's always guys you'll love in the draft, and we were hoping this guy would be available at the right time for us. So how many guys in this draft that you love secretly, and they may be 4th or 5th round guys?
Yeah, I think there's guys in every round that we're secretly hoping that fall to you. I think what happens is that's more likely the later the round. So we would love, let's just say a Hutchinson to fall to us at 30, but that won't happen. But when you get into the 2nd or 3rd round, then that comes into play. Like we would love for these guys to fall, and as the draft goes on, the likelihood of guys that that you have valued in that particular round, the odds increase. But that happens every round. So obviously, like I said, there's guys that we would love the Cincinnati corner to fall at 32, but that won't happen. But again, once you get in the 4th and 5th round, that's when you have these wide discrepancies of league-wide views and how they feel about players. Everyone, when you talk about guys on your front board, we may be at 16, 18, another team may be at 16 or 17, but typically around the league, I mean, it's going to be very close to being the same names. By the time you get to round 3 and you ask teams, I mean, they could be just completely different. So that's where the likelihood of hoping a guy falls dramatically increases. And as far as what to believe, I wouldn't believe anything. Yeah.
Brett, it seems like forever at that time he stated he wanted to keep talent around him. Mm-hmm. That's why he took less. How much dialogue, going back to the Tyreek Hill deal with the decision, how much dialogue did you guys have with Patrick, and going forward, how much input will he have?
Yeah, no, I mean, we talk all the time, and most of it is about the off-season program and the workouts, and he's getting after it, and I know he's excited. Last year, with the injury, it was a little bit rough to get out there and get moving and develop a rapport with some of the new guys. This year's a lot different, where he's healthier, and I know he has a group of guys down there in Texas working out with him every day, so we're able to talk about some of the stuff he's seeing. Obviously, we know some of the guys like the Kelseys and the Clydes and what they look like, but just his input on the Rojos and the Jujus and the Valdez-Scantlings, how they're doing, how they're coming along, is great for us in regards to, even for the draft and how this thing's coming together and what he's thinking. So the dialogue's been there. And certainly going back to the Tyreek thing, I mean, that was something that, we had kind of went through the scenarios and just put it on his radar. And Pat's not one of the guys that's calling and saying, what's going on? But, we just had that relationship where it's kind of a quick phone call. Hey, listen, this is kind of where this thing's going, and here's kind of what the information looks like, and, just don't want you to be surprised. And but he gets it. He'll be a guy that I know his wife is involved with the soccer team, but he'll be an owner or something because he understands, broad ideas and concepts and draft picks. And there's a lot of times he sounds like Clark, like, let's keep all of our picks,
Hey, Brett, a couple things. One, you've always been pretty aggressive, especially when you have picks to trade up. And I know a lot of talk about maybe Jameis Winston or something like that, but you talked about the value in 30 to 60. With where you guys are at and the chance that a Desmond Ridder or somebody like that really intrigues somebody and they want to get that fifth-year option, are you guys more open to maybe trading back this year than you might be in years past, or how do you value that fifth-year option?
Yeah, no, I think that it certainly comes into play when you talk about quarterbacks, and the fifth-year option for quarterbacks is something that, having that option is important for all players, but none more so than a quarterback. So I think that there's certainly value in there that, like you mentioned, there will be value from that early second to middle three. And if a team is motivated to get a quarterback that maybe they just felt like it was a little high at maybe the top 3, 4, 5 picks or whatever, but they're coming right back around in 2, and they still like the guy's still on the board. It's certainly very likely that they're going to call a team that has multiple picks, because it'd probably be easier to work with a team like that. But you would think that if a quarterback that they have a liking to is still there, that they would be more motivated to get that fifth year than any other skill position.
And then the other thing was, Tyreek's gone, right? But you've added Marquez, you've added Juju. Is there a profile you're looking for in a receiver to supplement that room that already has McColl and those guys? Are you looking for an X? Are you looking for a slot? Is there something that you guys are prioritizing you think would complement what you already have?
Yeah, so like when you trade Tyreek, there's always the, light components or how you're going to fill it. And I guess on one end, it's very hard to replicate, a talent like Tyreek Hill. But I also think that sometimes that there's that mindset or idea that or forgetting, I guess, how great of a coach Andy Reid is. He's one with all type of quarterbacks and all different offensive schemes, and our staff is very dynamic. And look, we had Tyreek Hill, and we were able to implement a lot of RPO stuff and a lot of vertical attack stuff. But it doesn't mean when you have a talent like Pat Mahomes and a Hall of Fame coach like Andy that you can't rewire and retweak your offense and how you do things. And there's multiple ways that we've scored points over the years. And would you like to find someone like Tyreek? Yeah, but I think every team would. If you don't, there's many ways to win games, and our offense, I think, is extremely flexible, and I think a lot more flexible than what people think. And I think for us and for what we do, we're just going to go out there and collect good players, and they might not be 4-2 guys, but if they're good football players, we're going to put them in position to make plays and win a lot of games.
Along those same lines, I guess, but for the edge position in this year's class, it seems like Spagnuolo kind of has a type, not that there's not outliers or whatever, but how do you measure what makes sense for what he likes in his scheme, who you like, any measurables that cut you off there? Like, how does that process work?
I think it's just consistent dialogue and kind of going through draft histories, our roster. This is where the self-evaluation of our own team and our self-scouting comes into play, where we came short, where we can get better, how we can get deeper. But I think it's another one of those scenarios where it's a slower evolution, but it's bits of information over a year that kind of accumulates. But more than anything, it's constant communication. We have good dialogue. It comes up a lot with some of the 34 rushers where they're not really ideal scheme fits. But at the end of the day, if you can get guys that can rush a quarterback, let's find a way that we can, utilize them and implement them. So we do get into a lot of, visionary type discussions in regards to if we bring this guy, there may be limitations on reducing him and playing him down, but whether it be, standing him up and playing him in a joker type role or just as a pure DPR, how do we see that, how do we fit that? And those conversations go into more conversations with the college staff and their ability to learn and retain. So it's just exchanging ideas and just getting to a point where there's always a little give and take, but getting to the point where everyone feels comfortable and sees the vision together.
Brett, I asked you this last year. I mentioned how most teams typically have anywhere between 180 to 220 players on the draft board. and last year you had mentioned because of COVID it was less. With COVID restrictions now lifted, how close to normal are you this year as you look at your draft board?
That was the only number I wrote down because I was like, someone's gonna ask me this question. So it was, my cap guys keep a log of that, and we get into these meetings, and so I'm not looking at every number every single day. And it's funny because I was leaving to come down here, and I said to Chris Shea, I said, how many numbers? Because somebody's gonna ask me this. So we have 194. And that is a lot more than it was from certainly last year with the COVID year, and it's a little bit more than most years, which makes sense given the fact that so many guys were able to come back and get an extra year with COVID. So there's a lot of numbers, but we have a lot of picks, so I think it's okay that we have a few extra numbers this year.
Dorsey used to brag he could get that number down to about 120.
Yeah. No, I think that's something that it makes it a lot easier. So I'm sure that by the time we get to next Thursday, 194, there'll be a reduction from that too. But just trying to cover all the bases.
Last two, we'll go Sam and Adam. Brett, did you always anticipate that this would be a year maybe you could absorb Mahomes' bonus? And how much does that change things for you down the road?
Yeah, I think that, again, like the question about Tyreek Hill and, did you go into that negotiation with, I think similar to that contract too. We look at all the our options, what each option means, what would be the best option, and so that's something that that there's we've preserved and we can work with now. I think you're always driven to see if you can make other things work, and that was one of those things that we talked about and it just didn't make sense. But we do have some flexibility now as that contract continues to grow and it is long, so that's something that we have and we'll be able to utilize to again continue to surround Pat with talent.
And how different is the job title, exactly what your goal is the same, but how different do you feel like you operated this year, this offseason as opposed to last offseason with this number?
Yeah, I think just the whole process has been a lot more intense because of the number of picks, the number of players, and then the process being back to normal. So I think I mentioned it right at the beginning of the press conference where last few years it was tape and Zoom calls. And this year it's guys were flying back in for pre-combine meetings. Well, first we had free agency meetings to pre-combine meetings to fly into the combine, to meet the players there, then to going out to pro days and having players come in here and our coaches go out and work them out. So there was a lot of moving parts this year, and it was like obviously years past, but not having that for 2 years and then having all these picks and then having everything just open up and unleash on us was a lot of work. But again, that's a credit to the staff and the coaches just putting in the extra hours of work. My staff coming in earlier and flying out here, weeks ahead of time just to make sure we have all these bases covered with this amount of picks. So we feel really good about it. But again, I don't think we'd be there, if not for the great work by the staff I have and the coaching staff.
A couple of things, Brett. First, understanding you're probably going to add a guy or two at wide receiver. Where do you feel like you guys are right now at that position?
Yeah, no, we feel like we're in a good spot. And again, having 12 picks, you're going to have flexibility to add on both sides of the football. And if there's a receiver that makes sense in obviously in any of these rounds, that's the beauty of having so many picks. But I think when you have Kelsey and a guy like Juju, I think you have a really good you really have good advantages and matchups in the intermediate game, and certainly McCole and Marquez can stretch the field. Clyde's healthy. This is the first full offseason he's going to have, and I know that he's spoken about that and just some of the injuries and the issues he's had now that he's healthy. And then you throw in a guy that we really liked in the process a few years ago in Rojo that we think he adds another element. And so, we feel really good about our skill players. Certainly we have a talented offensive line, and now we have an opportunity to add more players on again, both sides. But offensive line depth is good in this draft. So we feel like we can add depth and youth there. And we'll certainly always look to add skill and talent around Pat and look forward to doing that.
Can you give us a sense of where a couple of injured guys are in their rehabs and when they might be back?
Yeah.
Lucas Niang and Jody Fortson.
So I think Jody I don't have an update on just because I haven't gotten with Rick on him. Lucas, we did speak, I want to say about 3 days ago. Lucas actually flew in and got an update on his MRI, and everything was exactly where it needed to be. And, with the bigger guys, you're always worried about, especially with that injury. I'll certainly defer to Rick, but just in general, his timeline, Rick was excited about the degrees of flexion and flexibility. It was a check plus, so that means it was where it needed to be, and he was right on schedule. So, I think, and again, I don't know if Rick had mentioned this, and at a certain point he will. I think that him by the end of training camp, is something that could happen. But he's definitely on target to where he needs to be.
Last one.
Hey, Brett, you mentioned cornerback and, relation to the early picks. That hasn't been a position that you've necessarily invested a lot of draft resources, high-end draft resources, or even a big contract. How much of that is philosophy versus circumstance? And at the same time, is that a position that, there's just a limited pool of guys that fit what you want to do?
I think it's more circumstance than limited pool. I think that most people with roster construction is quarterback and then O-line and then D-line and corner. I think that's a general league consensus, and I think we adhere to most of those conceptual concepts. So I just think that, and I think I said this after the season, when you have higher name profile players on your team and, so you're limited, and then when you're picking 30, 31, 32 every year, those corners go off really quick. And then you just come into that age-old question, are you over, you try not to take a third-round corner at the top of two or the second-round corner. Inevitably, though, if you only have 16 names on the board, you're always reaching a little bit. So it's just that price point. But I think it's, 90% just circumstantial. If you can get a good, long, athletic corner, you're going to get one of those guys all day. It hadn't worked out. And I think sometimes what gets lost in translation, too, is names that people see on a draft server or, what they don't factor into is the things that you don't see. So we'll all see the 40, right? And we'll see the test numbers in the tape. And we can all sit here and maybe watch a guy and agree that he's good. But there are interviews that take place, and there are background checks that take place, and there are injury, medical records that take place. And so, sometimes it's we passed on X, Y, and Z. Well, he was off our board. It wasn't in discussion because of this reason, that reason. And it happens every year. And no one's going to say who's off their board, and we wouldn't do that. But those are some of the things that I think, other than picking 30 is a dynamic, not having a ton of cap space because of the high-profile players we have is a dynamic. The fact that corners cost $16 million a year is a dynamic, and then the fact that there may be sheer numbers of just names you're looking at, but are those guys all on our board? Or did some of those guys, for some reason, and maybe it's the wrong reason by us, there's times that we make mistakes on character, medical, that all happens too. But there are dynamics that you have to have core philosophies and stick by them, or you're always chasing your tail. So I would say it's more circumstantial.
That'll do it for today and this week on SportsBeat KC. Thanks to our sponsor, First Federal Bank. Randy Mason produced today's show with help from Monty Davis, Jeff Rosen, Chris Pickett, and Tammy Youngblood. Morning Sports Edition, it's a no-brainer, 32 pages today. Plenty of news on the Royals and coverage of the UMKC basketball coaching change, and much more. Go to kansascity.com and the subscription tab for more information. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with plenty of NFL draft coverage on SportsBeat KC.